An 18-year-old boy stands frozen at a bus stop in the freezing dark. Behind him, an old woman whispers an address that doesn't exist. 4 people have already walked past her tonight. 4 people saw her. 4 people kept walking. He has 40 minutes to make one delivery. To miss it, and by morning, everything he owns will be sitting in a garbage bag on a locked porch. The woman's hands are shaking. Her silver pendant catches the streetlight, and engraved on the back an address nearly 2 hours away. Uphill, through the cold, he looks at the road. He looks at her. He looks at the road again. What he doesn't know, she remembers everything. What he doesn't know, someone will come looking for him by sunrise. What he doesn't know, this single moment is about to cost him everything he has, and give him back everything he lost. He takes off his jacket. The cold came early that year, not the gradual kind. Not the kind that gives you 2 weeks of warning, that starts with cool mornings and works its way down slowly. Politely, like a house guest who understands they're an imposition. This cold just arrived, overnight. Like a decision that had already been made somewhere else and was only now being delivered. By the second week of November, Mill Haven, Ohio looked like someone had reached into it and pulled out all the warmth and color and left only the structure behind. The trees on Sycamore Avenue stood stripped and dark. The sky sat low in the color of old pewter. The storefronts kept their lights on longer than usual, not because it helped much, but because everyone needed something warm to look at. Callan Webb had stopped registering the cold somewhere around the middle of October. When you move enough, your body stops keeping score of temperature. It just keeps score of friction, the push of the pedal, the pull of the wind, the slight complaint in his left knee that had started in August, probably from the hill on Danner Street that he'd been doing 5 times a week. And that was not going away no matter how many times he told it to. He was 18 years old. Lean in the way that comes from not eating enough, not from discipline. His jacket was army surplus. Dark green, 2 sizes too large. Because larger meant more trapped air and more trapped air meant warmer. And warmth was a resource you managed carefully when you didn't have a reliable source of it. He had learned things like that over the past 13 months. Practical things. The kind of knowledge nobody puts in a curriculum because they assume somebody at home already covered it. There was no home. Not exactly. There was a room. 2nd floor of Glen Marsh's boarding house on Pitford Street. 12 feet by 10 feet, which Callan had measured once on a slow evening by counting heel to toe across the linoleum. A window that faced a brick wall and fogged over by 7 every evening. A radiator that made promises it couldn't keep clicking and hissing through the night, producing just enough heat to make you think it might actually commit, and then not committing. It was enough. It was his. Until tonight it was his. The bicycle was the first thing people noticed. Not Callan, the bicycle. It was old in a way that only things that have been genuinely loved get old. Not neglected, not broken down. Loved past its prime, which is a completely different condition. The frame was a deep blue-green, the color of lake water on a cloudy afternoon, faded in patches where years of sun had worked at it. The handlebars had been rewrapped in black electrical tape, not once but twice. The rear rack had been repaired with a strip of flat metal and 3 mismatched bolts that held anyway, which was the only thing that mattered. It had belonged to his mother. Iris Webb had ridden that bicycle every morning for 11 years from their apartment on Garfield Street to the Mill Haven Laundry on 5th, where she worked 6 days a week folding other people's clothes and making sure the machines ran right, 14 minutes each way. She used to say the ride was the best part of her day, not because the laundry was bad, but because those 14 minutes, pedaling in the early morning before the world got its hands on her, were entirely hers. She died 13 months ago. Lung cancer, diagnosed late, treated inadequately. Which was not a failure of medicine so much as a failure of coverage. The gap between what the insurance would cover and what the treatment actually cost was a number that started at several $1,000s and climbed from there. By the time the hospital social worker had found a pathway through the paperwork, there was not enough of Iris left to save. Callan did not spend a lot of time thinking about this. He had taught himself not to. The way you teach yourself not to touch something that burns, not because you stop knowing it's there, but because you learn the exact distance to maintain. Every time his mind started toward the particular weight of it, toward the specific shape of that loss, he found something to do with his hands. Tighten the brake cable, check the tire pressure against his thumb, adjust the strap on the delivery bag, move, keep moving. Moving was the architecture of not falling apart. That evening he had 4 deliveries left on his route, then 3, then 2, then 1. The last one was a prescription pickup for a man named Gerald Foss. Gerald lived at the far end of Danner Street in a narrow house with a porch light that was always on, winter and summer, day and night, as if Gerald had decided years ago that the light was staying on and had never revisited the decision. 2 prescription bottles metformin for blood sugar, something else for blood pressure, both from the pharmacy on Clement. Gerald tipped exactly $1 every time, folded in half, extended with both hands with the gravity of a real estate transaction. Kalen appreciated this more than Gerald would ever know. He adjusted the delivery bag across his chest, checked his phone, 7:14 p.m. He had until 8 o'clock, that was the math. Get the delivery to Gerald by 8. Collect the tip, add it to what he had from the rest of the week, and the total would clear his rent at Pitford Street by a margin of about $11. $11 was not comfortable, but it was the right side of zero, which was the only side that kept the key working in the lock. Glenn Marsh had been clear about it 3 days ago. Standing in the boarding house doorway with his arms folded, and that expression he used, the one that was supposed to read as reluctant, but was actually just impatient. "One more week, Callan. That's the last extension I can give you." A pause for what Glenn probably believed was effect. "It's not personal. Nothing was ever personal when it was happening to you. And yet it always felt that way." Callan got on the bicycle and pushed off. The route to Danner Street ran down Sycamore to 4th. Left past the old hardware store that had been shuttered so long. The for lease sign in the window had faded to near illegibility. Past Gus Perino's grocery on the corner, where the window light was always that particular yellow that means someone is actually in there, and the heat is actually on, and then right along the stretch of 4th that took you past the bus shelter at the intersection with Sycamore. Bus stop 9. That's what the Green City sign said. Route 9 Aldercroft Westfield. The shelter was a standard municipal structure, 3 walls, a roof, a bench along the back wall, a schedule posted inside that was accurate in the way that optimistic documents are accurate. Callan had passed it probably 300 times. He didn't look at it when he rode past. Except tonight his hands did something his brain hadn't authorized, both brakes together. A reflexive full stop that he wasn't aware of deciding. The bicycle slowed and stopped at the edge of the curb, and Callan put his foot down and stood there and looked at the shelter. She was standing inside it in a way that was different from how people stand when they are waiting. When people wait, they have a relationship with time. They check their phones or they look up the street for the thing they're waiting for. They shift their weight. They perform the small, impatient choreography of expectation. This woman was not doing any of that. She was small. Her coat was pale beige wool, the kind that had been good coat once, really good. The kind with proper lining and weighted hems but had been worn long enough that it had achieved a kind of dignified exhaustion. A hat on her silver hair, white or once white, pushed slightly back. Her hands held a leather purse with both of them. The way you hold something you're not entirely sure is still yours. She was looking at the street, not at traffic, not at an approaching bus, at the street itself. The specific look of someone who has been staring at a word so long it has stopped looking like a word. Like she was trying to locate herself inside, something that should be familiar and wasn't connecting. Her lips were moving. He couldn't hear what she was saying from across the street, but the shape of it looked like an address, or a name, something she was repeating to try to keep hold of it. In the time that Callan stood there with his foot on the ground and the bicycle stopped under him, 4 people passed the bus shelter. A man in a down coat, phone pressed to his ear, walking fast. He glanced at her once, a glance that registered and then deliberately released. His pace didn't change. A woman carrying 2 bags of groceries with the posture of someone who has been on her feet all day. She looked at the old woman in the shelter for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away with an expression Callan recognized, the expression of someone who has decided that whatever this is, it is not their thing to handle tonight. 2 teenage boys in school jackets came through the intersection, talking with the full-bodied animation of people who exist completely inside their own conversation. They walked past the shelter without breaking stride, without any indication that they had seen her at all. Callan sat on his bicycle at the curb. He sat there and he felt something happen in his chest that was not quite pity and not quite recognition, but was somewhere in the specific territory between the two. Pity is soft and it keeps its distance. This thing had a grip to it. He had seen that look before, on his mother's face. In the last weeks, when the medication blurred the days together and she would sometimes surface from sleep, looking not scared but displaced, like someone who has woken up in a room they knew once and can't quite map onto now. She had worked very hard not to let him see it. He had worked very hard to pretend he didn't. He remembered standing in the doorway of her room at 2 a.m., watching her try to find the thread that connected the present moment to all the moments before it. The effort of it, the quiet, exhausting effort. When you see someone the world has stopped seeing, Kaylin. You stop, his mother's voice. Not a memory of a specific conversation, more like something that had become part of the architecture of him. The way a proverb becomes part of you before you fully understand what it means. He understood it now. He got off the bicycle. He walked toward the shelter the way you approach something that might startle. Slowly, evenly, without any sudden movement that could tip the moment in a bad direction. She heard him coming, turned. Her eyes were a clear gray. The kind of gray that was not empty, it was complicated. Layered, the gray of something that had held a lot of weather. They found his face and stayed there, which surprised him. He had expected the vagueness to extend to him. It didn't. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "Quiet, I'm sorry to bother you. Are you all right?" A pause, long enough that he thought she might not answer. "Then I'm trying to get home." Her voice was steady. Whatever was confused in her was confused about place, not about language, not about the basic transaction of conversation. "The number 9 bus," she said. "I thought it came at 7. Or perhaps 7:30. She looked at the street again. "My husband always said I got the times wrong. He was usually right about that." A small, brittle smile. "He was usually right about most things." Kellen turned to look at the schedule posted inside the shelter. It was half covered by a flyer for a lost cat named Biscuit, but he could read enough. Route 9, stops 6:45 a.m. 9:20 a.m. 12:05 p.m. 15 p.m. 6:45 p.m. 9:20 p.m. Nothing at 7. Nothing at 7:30. She had missed the 6:45. The next one wasn't until 9:20. "The next bus isn't for a while," he said carefully. "Oh." She absorbed this, looked at the purse in her hands. "Well, do you know your address? Where you're trying to get to?" She looked down at the purse, opened it. The interior was organized in a way that suggested someone who was normally careful with things: a handkerchief folded into a square, a small coin purse, a lipstick without its cap. She rummaged with one hand. A grocery receipt came out from 3 days ago, a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a church bullet, a bus transfer dated Tuesday, no address written anywhere. Callan felt the clock in his chest. Not an anxiety, just an awareness. He had been aware of the time since he'd left the pharmacy. The awareness was constant and low grade, like a sound you can hear but have stopped actively listening to. It was there. Gerald Foss and his blood pressure medication were there. The rent in Glenmarsh and the room on Pitford Street were all there, accounted for, measured against each other in the ongoing calculation that was every evening of his life. And then he stopped doing the calculation. Because he noticed something: a chain around her neck, silver, fine, slightly tarnished at the clasp, which meant it had been worn a long time, which meant it mattered. At the end of the chain, resting against the front of her coat, a small oval pendant. He leaned forward, just slightly, not enough to crowd her, enough to read the engraving on the back. Small letters, precise, worn at the edges but legible: Nora Whitmore, 22 Aldercroft Road. He knew Aldercroft Road. In September, he had done a delivery out there, a birthday cake in a white box, with instructions from the bakery, repeated no fewer than 5 times. "Do not tilt the box." He had ridden the whole way with his arms slightly out from his sides like a tightrope walker. Aldercroft ran along the northern edge of Millhaven, past the point where the town committed to being a town and became something older and quieter. Houses set well back from the road. Trees with root systems that buckled the sidewalk in long, slow waves. The kind of neighborhood that didn't need to announce itself. 22 Aldercroft Road was close to 2 hours away by bicycle. Uphill, in the dark, in this specific cold. He stood at bus stop 9, and for one long, clear moment he did not think about Gerald Foss, did not think about Glenmarsh, did not do the calculation. He just looked at the woman in front of him, at her clear gray eyes, at the pendant resting against her coat, at the way she was holding her purse with both hands, as if she had decided to hold on to this one thing carefully, since other things had become unsteady. And he made the decision that his hands had already made when they'd hit the brakes 30 seconds ago. "I know where that is," he said. "I can take you." She blinked. "On your bicycle?" "On my bicycle." She looked at the bicycle, looked at him, looked at the bicycle again with an expression that was somewhere between assessment and a very quiet kind of amusement. "I'm 82 years younger than this bicycle," she said, roughly. He almost smiled. The rack's reinforced. It'll hold. Well, she said, with the brisk equanimity of someone who has made decisions in harder situations than this one. All right then. Getting her onto the rear rack was not an elegant operation. There was a moment, one specific moment, where she reached for the rack with one hand and misjudged the height and tilted, and Callan caught the handlebars with both hands to keep them both upright, and for approximately 2 seconds the whole situation was genuinely precarious. Then it wasn't. She was seated on the rack, her feet on the side pegs, her purse in her lap. Small and determined, his jacket. He hadn't planned it. He registered her hands stiff at the fingers, the particular rigidity of hands that have been cold longer than they should have been, and he took his jacket off before he'd thought through whether this was a good idea, and put it around her shoulders. "Oh, I really have to," he said. "Your hands are cold." She looked at him. That specific look, like she was placing him somewhere in a map of things she knew, like something he'd done had connected to something she already understood. "What's your name?" she asked. "Callan." "Nora," she said. Then, quietly, to herself more than to him, "Hold on, Nora." He got on the bicycle, pushed off, and they left the pool of light at bus stop 9 and moved out into the dark of Sycamore Avenue, heading north. There is a particular quality to riding a bicycle in the dark with another person. The noise of the town fell away. The streetlights came less and less frequently as they moved north. The sound of the pedals, the creak of the rear rack at the repaired joint. The wind that had been just cold before and was now without his jacket, finding its way through his hoodie and his shirt and against his skin with more efficiency than he'd hoped. He didn't say anything about it, because that was not the point. Behind him, after a few minutes, Nora began to talk, not in the frantic way of someone covering fear. In the thoughtful, slightly wandering way of someone who has found, in the specific anonymity of this moving darkness, that words are suddenly available again after a long time of being difficult to locate. She talked about her husband, Walter. How he used to take the long way home on Sunday evenings when their son was a boy, back when Broderick was maybe 4 or 5 years old, because Broderick always fell asleep in the car and slept better in motion, and the long way home through the north roads gave him an extra 40 minutes of that sleep. She and Walter would just drive, not talking most of the time, just being in the car together while the boys slept in the back seat and the Ohio countryside went past in the dark. Walter had been gone 6 years. She said this the way you say something you have repeated many times, not easily, but without the rawness of something still new. She had learned to say it. She had learned what it meant and had been learning it again and again ever since. She talked about the house. Too many rooms, she knew. People said it kindly, you could find something smaller. "Nora, there are lovely options," and what they meant was that a house that size didn't make sense for one person. But the house was not about size. It was about the specific knowledge of it. She knew where the light fell in every room at every hour. She knew the way the kitchen smelled in the morning, and the sound the side gate made in the wind, and the spot on the second stair from the top where the wood sang if you stepped on the left edge. You couldn't take that knowledge with you when you moved. You had to start over building it somewhere else. At 78 years old, she did not want to start over. Then she talked about Owen. She came to him more slowly. The way you approach something that requires care. Owen was her grandson, her only grandchild. Her daughter Elaine's boy, who had spent his summers at 22 Aldercroft Road from the time he could walk, and who had, somewhere around the age of 12, become the person in the family who actually listened when she talked. Not performed listening, actually received what she said. He had been studying engineering at a university 2 hours north, on a partial scholarship he had earned, and a gap he was covering with 3 jobs: tutoring, kitchen work at a diner, weekend deliveries for a hardware store. She had offered to help. Many times, in every phrasing she could devise, he had said no, every time. He had the kind of stubbornness that was quiet and thorough and absolute. He did not argue, he just didn't move. "I'm fine, Grandma," said with such complete certainty that for a long time she believed it, until the Tuesday in April, 4 years ago, when he was walking across the university campus to his 8 o'clock class, and his heart, which had been running on too little sleep and too much stress for too many months, simply stopped. 19 years old. He loved his bicycle, she said after a pause that had its own weight. He rode everywhere. Even in the winter, she stopped again. Then, his shoes were always worn at the heel. He bought them once and wore them until they were done, and then bought the same pair again because he said there was no reason to change something that worked. A sound that was almost a laugh but had something sadder in it. He was very proud of those shoes. Callan kept pedaling. He did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would be better than silence. Some stories close behind themselves like doors, and you leave them closed. You just let the person know you heard by staying. Harmon's gas station appeared on the right side of Route 9 at about the 45-minute mark. Callan knew it from the September delivery. From here, 22 Aldercroft was another 50 minutes, give or take, depending on how his legs held on the last hill. He pulled into the forecourt. His legs needed 30 seconds, just 30. But the real reason was her hands. He could feel them through the jacket. She'd been holding his shoulders for balance for 45 minutes, and even through the fabric he could feel the stiffness of them. Cold that had gotten all the way in. 1 minute, he said. He helped her down carefully, went inside. The girl behind the counter was watching something on her phone propped against the register. She looked up when he came in with the expression of someone interrupted mid-thought. He checked his pockets. Right front, $1 bill, folded, and 2 quarters in the small coin pocket inside. $1.75 total. The smallest coffee on the menu was $1.69. He had read that sign before, on the September delivery when he'd stopped here and decided against it because the margin wasn't right. Tonight, the margin wasn't right either. He bought the coffee. He went back out. Nora was standing under the awning looking up at the sky. There were no stars visible, the cloud cover was total, but she was looking anyway. The way people look at the sky when they need something large enough to remind them that their problems have a context. He held out the cup. She looked at it, then at him, then at the cup. "You need it more than I do," she said. The same words probably she had said to other people in other situations. Said with the gentle authority of someone who has been taking care of people for 50 years and is not going to stop now. "Your hands," he said. She looked at her own hand, acknowledged the evidence, took the cup, held it in both hands, and then after a moment extended it toward him. An offering. He took one small sip, warm. The specific warmth of a gas station coffee that is not good coffee, but is real and hot and present. She watched him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Something between satisfaction and something older than satisfaction. The look of someone who has survived long enough to understand that the small exchanges are not small. "You remind me of him," she said. She didn't say the name, she didn't need to. Callan handed the cup back, looked at the darkness of Route 9 stretching north. "We should keep moving," he said, "before it gets colder." They reached 22 Aldercroft Road at 8 minutes past 10. Callan checked his phone when they turned into the lane. Noted the time the way he noted things, not with despair, not with anything dramatic, just noted it. Filed it, under things that had already happened and couldn't be adjusted. The lane leading to the house was gravel, lined on both sides by old trees whose roots had made the surface uneven. He navigated it slowly, careful of her. The house at the end of it was large, set back white paint on old wood that had weathered honestly. All the downstairs lights were on. And the gate. There was a gate in the stone wall at the entrance to the property, iron, old. It was hanging open at a permanent angle, not recently opened but fixed in openness. The hinge compromised in a way that had been compromised for long enough that it had become a feature rather than a problem. He filed this too, the way he filed things, without attaching a story to it yet. He pushed the bicycle up the gravel path. The front door opened before he reached it. A man stepped out onto the porch, late 60s. Dark vest over a white shirt despite the hour. The kind of man who maintained his standards as a form of self-respect rather than performance. His face in the porch light moved through confusion and recognition, and relief and something else, something that landed in the vicinity of guilt. Though Callan didn't yet have the context to understand it. "Mrs. Whitmore," his voice was careful, measured. Like someone who had been containing something for hours, and was now releasing it at a controlled rate. "We've been looking." He stopped, started again, simpler. "Your home, Desmond," she said, warm and clear and entirely present. "This is?" "He brought me home." Desmond looked at Callan, not a glance, a real look, the kind that takes inventory, the worn shoes, the jacket that was currently around someone else's shoulders, the bicycle with its mismatched bolts and blue-green frame, the face that was doing its best to present this whole situation as ordinary. "Thank you," Desmond said. He said it quietly. Not as a pleasantry, as something he actually meant, delivered with the weight of actually meaning it. "She needs to warm up," Callan said. "Her hands have been cold for a while." "Yes, of course." Desmond came forward, one hand extended gently toward Nora's elbow. "Please come inside," he said to Callan. "Let us." I'm all right, Callan said. I should head back. He moved to take his jacket from Nora's shoulders. She let him take it, and as she did, she put her hand over his. Just for a moment, a brief, deliberate pressure, not a grip, a recognition. Thank you, Callan, she said. She said his name. He hadn't been sure she'd remembered it, but she said it like she'd been holding it carefully, like it was something she intended to keep. He nodded, found the delivery receipt in his jacket pocket, the receipt for Gerald Foss's prescription. The delivery that had not happened tonight, that Gerald was presumably still waiting for. He turned it over, blank on the back. Desmond produced a pen from where, it wasn't clear, but he was the kind of man who always had a pen. Callan wrote his number, held it out to Desmond. In case she needs anything, he said. Desmond took it, looked at it, folded it once and put it in his vest pocket, with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood they were holding something that mattered. Callan walked back down the gravel path. Did not look at the house. Got on the bicycle. Rode. The ride back was a different kind of cold. Not the working cold, the pushing cold, the cold you generate resistance against and through which you stay warm by the sheer fact of movement. This was the arriving cold. The stopping cold. The cold that comes when the purpose is finished and the body slows down and realizes what it has been putting off feeling. He knew what he was going to find at Pitford Street. He knew it the way you know things that your body understands before your mind finishes the argument. He rode anyway, 'cause you have to actually be there for it to be real. You have to look at it. You can't just know it from a distance and let it be real that way. The porch light at Glen Marsh's boarding house was off. The front window was dark. The door was locked, not the regular locked, the end of night locked, the kind that still opens when you have a key. This was a different kind of locked. He knew before he tried the key. Tried it anyway. It went into the lock and turned and the door did not open, which confirmed what the weight of the night had already been telling him for the past hour. He stood on the porch, looked at the door, then looked down. A grocery bag, one of the thin plastic kind, from the discount mart on Clement Street, twisted at the top and tied in a loose, almost apologetic knot. Left against the base of the door, his name was not written on it. It didn't need to be. There was no one else. He picked it up. It was light. Of course it was light. He had not accumulated much. He stood on the porch in the dark and opened the bag. A gray sweatshirt, rolled small. The accounting textbook from the community college class he'd started in September and had stopped attending when September went the way September went. A phone charger with a fracture in the cable housing held together with electrical tape, and at the bottom, a photograph, not framed. Just a photograph, the kind printed at a drugstore, standard size. Curled at the corners from being handled or stored somewhere. It wasn't quite flat. Black and white wasn't right, it was color, but faded the way printed photos fade when they've lived in a wallet or a drawer or the inside of a book for a while. His mother, standing in front of the bicycle. Summer, judging by the trees behind her, green and full, nothing like tonight. She was laughing. Full and real, not posed, not knowing it was a photo moment, laughing at whatever was happening on the other side of the camera. He did not know who had taken it. He did not remember this photograph existing. It must have been tucked somewhere in the apartment, in the clearing out, in the bag of things that had come home with him, and that he had not fully gone through because going through them fully was a thing he had been postponing for 13 months. Callan sat down on the front step of the boarding house. The cold from the concrete came through his jeans immediately, and he sat down anyway, the way you sit when your legs have made the decision for you. He held the photograph. He looked at his mother's face, at the laugh. At the way the laugh involved her whole face, not just her mouth, all of her eyes, and the way her shoulders came up slightly with it. He sat there for a long time. Did not cry. This was not strength. It was not something he had chosen. The grief in him had long since moved past the part where it produced tears and had settled into something deeper and quieter and more structural. The way a foundation is structural. The way the thing that holds everything up is the thing you never see. He sat with his mother's face in the photograph until the cold of the step had made itself a permanent fact. Then he put the photograph in his inside jacket pocket, pressed it flat against his chest, stood up. Gus Perino's grocery, half a block from the boarding house. The light in the window was on which it had business being at whatever time. This was that warm yellow that suggested life inside, heat inside. Someone at the counter still doing something that needed doing. Callan walked to the glass and looked in. Gus was at the register doing something with a receipt roll, squinting at it the way a man squints at something he doesn't fully trust. He looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. Gus looked at him for a moment, then at the bag in his hand, then back at his face. He set down the receipt roll, came to the door, unlocked it with the single sharp motion of someone who has made a decision and is not interested in discussing it. He looked at Callan, at the bag, at Callan's face again. "Glenn," he said. "Yeah," Callan said. Gus breathed out through his nose. The sound a person makes when they are not surprised and are also not pleased about not being surprised. He looked up at the ceiling briefly, which was either exasperation or a wordless exchange with some higher authority. Then he stepped back. "The cot's in the back," he said. "Blanket on the shelf above it. Don't move the wine crates. I have those arranged exactly how I want them. And don't tell anyone or I will absolutely charge you rent," Callan said. "Thank you." Gus had already turned away. "Come in," he said. "Close the door, it's cold." The back room of Perino's grocery smelled like cardboard, overripe oranges, and something faintly chemical from the cleaning supplies in the far corner. The cot was a narrow fold-out, the kind that has been folded and unfolded more times than its engineering intended. The blanket on the shelf above it was thin but real actual wool, the kind that means something. Callan unfolded the cot, sat on it, took off his shoes and set them on the floor with the neatness of someone who has learned to take care of things. He took the photograph out of his jacket pocket, put it on the shelf beside the blanket, face up, looked at her for a moment. His mother laughing, not knowing anyone was watching. Then he lay down. The radiator in the corner made a clicking sound. Not the irregular, unreliable click of the one on Pitford Street, more steady, like something working through a problem methodically rather than fitfully. The light through the small window above the shelf was the muted amber of a parking lot's worth of electric lights seen through frosted glass. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling. He thought about the road north, the specific resistance of Route 9 uphill in the dark, the sound of Nora Whitmore's voice behind him, telling him about Walter, about the long drives on Sunday evenings, about a boy named Owen, who wore the same shoes until they were finished. He thought about her hand over his on the porch, the specific deliberateness of it. He thought about Desmond folding the receipt into his vest pocket. He thought about his mother in the photograph, laughing at something he would never know. He thought she would have liked her, he thought. She would have known exactly what to say. He closed his eyes. The clicking of the radiator, the muffled town outside, the specific silence of a place that wasn't his, which was a different silence from the silence of a place that was. He was tired in a way that went below his muscles, the deep tired, the kind that sleep can't fix in one night but that you keep sleeping toward anyway because it's the only direction available. He slept. At 22 Aldercroft Road, the kitchen lights were still on. Nora Whitmore sat at the kitchen table in dry wool socks and a cardigan that had been in her closet for 20 years and still fit the same. Both hands around a mug of chamomile tea that had cooled past the point of being good. She was not drinking it, she was just holding it. Desmond stood at the counter. He was not doing anything at the counter. He was simply standing near her in the way he had stood near her for 28 years. Which was the way of someone who has learned that proximity is sometimes more useful than action. Between them on the table, a torn receipt. A phone number in pencil, slightly uneven, written on the knee of someone who was leaning over and in a hurry. Nora looked at it. She thought about the bicycle, the specific color of it in the light of the gas station forecourt, that blue-green, like a lake before rain. The way he had ridden, not fast, not showy, just steady. The particular steadiness of someone who is used to making things work with what he has. She thought about his shoes, worn at the heel, the left one more than the right, from the way he put his foot down on that side. She thought about the coffee. $1.75, approximately, if she had to guess. And he had handed it to her without making anything of it. Without any of the particular performance that generosity sometimes comes wrapped in. The performance that makes you feel the debt while you're receiving the gift. He had just handed her the cup, like it was the obvious thing. She thought about Owen, which she tried not to do too often. Not because the thinking hurt less than it used to, but because grief, she had found, was best practiced in measured amounts. You took it in doses. You learned the difference between remembering someone and drowning in the fact of them. But tonight was a night for thinking about Owen. Because the boy on the bicycle was not Owen. He was nothing like Owen in the specific biographical way. Different in every demographic detail, different in history and circumstance and what his life had given him and what it had taken, but the same in some structural way, in the way that mattered. The steadiness, the quietness, the way of doing what needed doing without requiring an audience for it. She looked at the phone number on the receipt for a long time. Then she said, without looking up, "Desmond." "Yes," he said. "Find him in the morning." Desmond picked up the receipt from the table, looked at the number, understood what she was asking and understood why. Set it down. "I'll find him," he said. Outside the window, the first real snow of November had begun to fall. Tentative. Small flakes barely visible unless you looked directly at the light coming from the porch. Not sticking yet, just arriving. Nora looked at the window, at the receipt on the table. She thought about the word home, a word she had been using for 78 years, and which, tonight, meant something slightly different than it had before. Not the house. Not the rooms she knew the weight and light and breath of. Something smaller and more essential than that. The feeling of being seen by someone who had no reason to look. The feeling of someone treating you as if you were still worth the distance. She reached out and picked up the receipt, folded it once, held it in both hands the way she had held the coffee cup, with care, with the specific care you give to things that are warm and that you do not want to let go cold. Outside, the snow fell on Aldercroft Road, on the iron gate that hung permanently open, on the gravel path and the garden and the dark glass of the greenhouse. Soft, quiet, covering everything equally, the way grace does when it finally comes. Morning came in through the wrong window. That was the first thing Callan registered. Not the light itself, the direction of it. It came from the upper left. Not straight ahead the way it came through the foggy glass on Pitford Street. Upper left, which meant east, which meant he was not where he had been sleeping for the past several months. He lay still for a moment, took inventory the way he'd learned to do, not anxiously, just methodically, the way you take stock of resources before deciding what to do with them. Ceiling unfamiliar. Low shelves on the right wall, stacked with flat cardboard boxes and something in brown paper bags and the wine crates Gus Perino had specifically asked him not to touch. Cot underneath him, narrow, slightly concave in the middle from years of use, but not uncomfortable, in the way that was the wrong kind of uncomfortable. Cold in the room, real but manageable. The radiator had kept its commitment through the night, more or less. The photograph was on the shelf where he'd left it, his mother, laughing at something no one would ever identify. He looked at it for a moment. Then he got up. He folded the blanket. He did this with the precision of someone who understood that you do not leave a mess in a place you're borrowing. Especially a place you're borrowing from someone who had not technically offered it to you, had just opened a door and stepped aside, which was a different thing and possibly a more important one. He straightened the cot, set his shoes parallel at the base of it, put the photograph carefully into his inside jacket pocket, pressed flat. Then he sat down again and did not know what to do next, which was new. For 13 months there had always been a next thing. Alarm at 5:40. Route check on his phone. First delivery by 6:15 if it was a pharmacy run, 7 if it was general. The day was structured by necessity, which meant it was structured, which meant there was always a next thing and the next thing was always clear. He had been grateful for this. The structure was not comfortable, but it was reliable. And reliable was something he could work with. Now the structure was gone and the morning was here and he was sitting on a folded cot in the back room of Gus Perino's grocery, and the next thing was not obvious. He sat with that for a while. Then the back door opened. Gus arrived at 6:43. Not because Callan checked the time. Because Gus's arrival was a sequence of sounds that suggested someone who had been performing this exact entry every morning for enough years that it had become automatic. Key in the lock not fumbled, precise. Door pushed with the left shoulder at a specific angle that suggested the door had a tendency to stick at the top, and Gus had long since identified the exact pressure required to address this. Feet on the linoleum, a flat, even shuffle, neither hurried nor slow, the walk of someone who has made peace with the pace of their own mornings. Gus came through to the back, looked at Callan. Callan looked at Gus. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Gus turned and went back to the front. 40 seconds later, his hand appeared around the edge of the doorframe, holding a banana. He held it there for a moment, not looking around the corner, just the arm and the banana, and then released it onto the shelf next to the photograph and withdrew. Coffee's on the counter, his voice came from the front. Don't make a mess back there. That was all. No questions. No expression of magnanimity that would have required Callan to perform gratitude in a way that felt like payment. Just the banana and the coffee and the instruction not to make a mess. Callan picked up the banana. He peeled it slowly, standing by the small window that looked out onto the side alley between Perino's and the dry cleaner next door. A sparrow was conducting some kind of intense investigation of a piece of wax paper on the alley floor, picking it up and dropping it and picking it up again, with the focused energy of something that believes it's onto something. He watched the sparrow, ate the banana, listened to Millhaven wake up around him. It happened in layers the way it always did, a car engine, then another. The bread delivery truck that double parked on 4th every morning and blocked traffic for exactly as long as it took to unload, which was always exactly as long as the first driver behind it ran out of patience. A dog somewhere across the block. The school bus doing its complicated negotiation with the corner of Sycamore and 5th, ordinary Wednesday. Except the car appeared at 7:42. Callan noticed it from the side window because it parked wrong. Not illegally wrong, just wrong for this block. Too deliberate, too unhurried. Cars on this stretch of 4th parked the way people on this stretch of 4th did everything with the mild efficiency of people who had somewhere to be and a reasonable idea of how to get there. This car pulled to the curb with the precision of someone who had arrived at an exact location they had been navigating toward, and had no interest in making anything of the arrival. Dark Buick, late model, clean in the way things are clean when someone maintains them because maintenance is a value, not because anyone is watching. The man who got out was in his late 60s, dark vest over a white shirt. A charcoal felt hat, the kind that had gone out of general circulation 40 years ago, and that this man wore without any apparent awareness that it might be unusual, which meant he'd been wearing hats like this for long enough that they were simply part of how he was dressed. He stood on the sidewalk, looked at the grocery, looked at a piece of paper in his hand, looked at the grocery again, then walked to the door and came in. Gus, behind the register, looked up. "I'm looking for Callan Webb," the man said. His voice was unhurried, carrying, but not loud. The voice of someone accustomed to speaking in rooms where what he said mattered, and so he had never needed to raise it. Gus didn't answer. He just looked slowly toward the doorway to the back room. Callan was already standing in it. They looked at each other across the length of the grocery. The man, Callan. The distance between them was maybe 30 feet, and it took Callan approximately 3 seconds to read the situation. Not all of it, not the specifics, but the shape of it. The shape was, "This is about last night." The man walked toward him, extended his hand. "My name is Desmond," he said. "I work for Mrs. Whitmore. She asked me to find you." Callan shook the hand. Firm, brief, both of them meaning it. "How is she?" "She's well. She slept. She's been up since 6. A pause. "She remembers everything. She wanted me to tell you that first." Callan absorbed this. He had not, he realized, known what to expect. He had not thought past the delivery of her to the door. Last night had been last night complete in itself, a thing that had happened and was over. The leaving of his phone number had been reflex, the same reflex that made him check the brake cable before a long ride. Not because he expected to use it, just because it was the responsible thing to leave behind. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just made sure she got home." Desmond nodded, the nod of someone who has considered this characterization and found it incomplete. "She knows," he said, "and she'd like to thank you herself. In person, if you're willing." Callan looked at Gus. Gus was examining the middle distance with the expression of someone deeply committed to not being part of this conversation while also clearly listening to every word of it. "I don't need anything," Callan said. "From her." "I'm not looking for, I know," Desmond said, simply, without debate. He reached into the inner pocket of his vest, set 2 things on the counter beside the register. The first was an envelope, cream-colored, small, heavy paper. Callan's name on it in handwriting that was precise and unhurried. The second was a photograph printed on plain copy paper. Black and white, the quality of something extracted from a security system. Grainy at the edges, clear enough in the center. Bus stop 9. Corner of Sycamore and 4th. The timestamp in the lower right corner said 7:23 p.m., November 12. In the photograph, a bicycle stopped at the curb. A woman in a pale coat standing near the shelter bench. And the figure on the bicycle, him. Clearly him. The rear rack visible, the outline of the jacket unmistakable, was in the act of taking off that jacket. Arms raised. The jacket in the process of being lifted away from his own shoulders. In the next moment of that sequence, it would have gone around hers. But the camera had caught the moment before. The moment of taking it off. The moment of deciding. Callan looked at the photograph for a long time. He had not thought about that moment since it happened. He had not experienced it as a gesture or a decision. His hands had done it, while the rest of him was still calculating distances and running the math on Gerald Foss and the 8 o'clock deadline and Glenn Marsh. He had not been aware of making a choice, but seeing it from outside, from a camera angle across the street and above, it looked different. It looked like the most deliberate thing he had ever done. He looked up at Desmond. "She asked someone to pull the camera footage," he said. "She asked the City Traffic Management Office," Desmond said. "She used to sit on the Public Safety Commission. She still knows who to call." He said this without apology or elaboration. Callan looked at the photograph again. Then he set it down. "Let me get my jacket," he said. Gus, from behind the register, made a sound that was not quite a word but communicated approval in the unmistakable way of a man who has strong feelings about things and has chosen to express them at minimum volume. The drive to 22 Aldercroft Road in daylight was an entirely different country. Not different road, different light. The same turns he had navigated by memory and moonlight were just turns. The hill that had taken everything his legs had 8 hours ago was just a hill. The trees that had loomed in the dark were bare and silver and honest-looking, their structure visible now, their substance undramatic. He sat in the back seat of the Buick and looked at the road unreeling ahead of them. Desmond drove the way he seemed to do everything without rushing, without dawdling, with a particular economy of motion that came from either long practice or a fundamental lack of interest in excess. "Has she had episodes before?" Callan asked. Not intrusively. Just to understand the shape of what had happened. "Two this year that we know of," Desmond said. "Both at night. Once in October, when she went to check the mail and didn't come back inside until I went to look for her. She was standing in the garden. She knew where she was, she just couldn't find her way back to the door." A pause. "Last night was different. She'd walked further than before. She said she was trying to get home." "She always says that," Desmond said. "Even when she's 20 feet from the front door." Callan looked out the window. The fields along Route 9 were frost-white and still. "Does she have family?" he said. "A son. Broderick. He lives in Columbus. He calls." Another pause. "He comes when he can." The way Desmond said when he contained a sentence's worth of information compressed into 3 words. Callan heard it and did not press. The gate at 22 Aldercroft was at its permanent angle. He noticed it again in daylight, the iron bar hanging open with the settled confidence of something that had been this way for long enough to have forgotten it was supposed to be otherwise. The hinge at the top was corroded. The latch mechanism on the right side had separated from the post. He noticed it, filed it, walked past. The gravel path in daylight showed its character, well maintained in the way of things that were attended to regularly but not recently. Someone raked it. Probably Desmond, probably on a schedule. The garden to the left of the path was winter bare, all structure, the bones of a rose bush. Some kind of ornamental grass, dried and pale, bent slightly in the morning air. Ceramic pots in a row along the low stone wall, empty now but placed with intention. Whoever had arranged them had a particular vision of how the space should feel. And behind the house, visible through the side yard, a greenhouse, glass and iron frame, maybe 20 feet by 15. Light inside it even now, green visible through the glass. Something alive in there tended through the winter. The front door opened before Desmond reached it. Nora Whitmore. Not the woman from the bus stop, or the same woman. But different in the way a photograph is different from the person it depicts. Same person, different dimension. She was wearing a cardigan the color of pine needles over a pale blue blouse, her silver hair pinned back with a precision that suggested it was a daily act performed out of habit rather than vanity. Reading glasses on a chain around her neck, hands at her sides, not clutching anything, not searching for anything. Her eyes, when they found Callan, were the same gray, but sharp now, focused in the way they had not been last night. The way a lens is sharp once it's correctly adjusted. She looked at him, a proper look, the kind that sees. "You," she said, one word. The weight of it was not dramatic. It was not the word of a scene being performed. It was the word of someone who had been thinking about a specific person for the past 12 hours, and was now confirming that the person in front of them matched the one in their thoughts. "Come in," she said. Please, the kitchen was warm, actually warm, not the approximation of warmth. A kettle on the stove, bread from that morning on a board on the counter, dried herbs in bunches hung from a hook near the window, rosemary, sage, something purple he didn't recognize. The warmth of a room that has had people working in it every day for decades and has been permeated by that, soaked through with the accumulated warmth of ordinary human activity. Nora sat across from him at the kitchen table. Desmond made tea and then, without announcement, was no longer in the kitchen. One moment he was there, The next he wasn't, the door was the same. He was simply somewhere else, in the way of someone who has learned over many years that the most valuable thing he can offer some moments is his absence from them. Nora put both hands around her mug, looked at Callan directly. I remember everything, she said. Not reassurance, not explanation. Establishment of facts stated the way you state facts when you want there to be no ambiguity about them. The turn you made at Route 9 onto the Aldercroft connector. What you said when you helped me onto the bicycle, you said hold on, which I thought was advice for both of us. Her eyes held steady on his. The gas station, the coffee, the way you looked out the window while I drank it. He said nothing. Because what was there to say? I have a condition, she said. It has a clinical name that I find overly dramatic, so I call it my nighttime confusion. It began 2 years ago. My doctor at the time thought it was early-stage dementia. My current doctor, who is considerably more thorough, diagnosed it as episodic disorientation triggered by specific conditions. Darkness, being alone, cold, disorientation in an unfamiliar place when I'm already tired. She lifted her chin slightly. During the day in familiar surroundings I am entirely myself. I think clearly. I remember accurately. I make my own decisions. A brief pause. My son disputes this when it's convenient for him to dispute it. He's wrong. The last sentence landed with the complete cheerful certainty of someone who has made peace with being right about a thing that other people find uncomfortable. Callan felt the corner of his mouth make a small movement. I lost my room last night, he said, because she was going to know. Millhaven was not large, and she had people like Desmond, who found things out, and it was better for it to come from him as information than to come from someone else as a revelation. Nora received this without flinching. Without the particular kind of flinching that is actually guilt performing itself as concern. I know, she said. Desmond confirmed it this morning. Of course. I would like you to stay here, she said. There is a room. There are several rooms. This house has far too much space and very little reason to keep all of it empty. She set down her mug. I am not offering you charity. I want to be clear about that. I have no interest in being someone's charity. I'm offering you a door. A room with a window that faces east, which means you'll have light in the morning, which I've always found makes the rest of the day more manageable. Callan looked at his hands on the table. He looked at them because he needed somewhere to look that wasn't her face. Because her face was too direct and he needed a moment to think without being seen thinking. The hands on the table were his inventory. The calluses on the right thumb from the handlebar grip. The dry skin at the knuckles that had been dry since October, and that he had not had the $11 for hand lotion to address, which was not a thing he thought about usually but which was visible now, here, at this table, in this kitchen, next to her hands which were smooth and age-spotted and folded around a mug with an ease that came from never having had to hold on too hard to things for too long. He was aware of the difference. He was aware of it in a way that was not envy and not shame but was something adjacent to both of those, something he didn't have a clean word for. The specific discomfort of receiving something you haven't earned from someone you've just met. I don't know what me home, she said. That's not? It is, she said. Quiet, certain. Not because of the logistics of it. Not because you physically transported me from one place to another. Because of how. She looked at him steadily. You talked to me like I was still someone worth talking to. You answered every question as if it were the first time I'd asked it. You bought me coffee with what was clearly your last dollar and then handed it to me without making anything of it. She paused. Do you know how long it has been since someone did something for me without making anything of it? He didn't answer because it wasn't a question that wanted an answer. You remind me of someone, she said. But I won't tell you who yet, because you'll think that's the reason. And it isn't. It's just why I noticed. He sat with this for a long time. Every instinct he had, the ones that had kept him functional and upright for 13 months, the ones that said do not need things, do not accept things you haven't earned, do not let yourself depend on what can be taken away, those instincts were all activating at once. A kind of internal alarm, quiet and insistent, and at the same time. Desmond's voice from later that morning, which he didn't have yet, but which was already forming somewhere in the future of the day, already becoming a thing that would be said, was already there somehow. You don't have to earn your place here. He was not there yet, but he was facing that direction. A few days, he said, until I can sort something out. Of course, she said. Neither of them mentioned that a few days was a phrase that carried within it a great deal of flexibility. The room faced east. He stood in it after Desmond had shown him where the towels were, and which of the 2 hall bathrooms was his, and where the thermostat was if he needed to adjust it, and he just stood there and looked at the window. East-facing, which meant morning light. Real morning light, not the suggestion of it that filtered around a brick wall and arrived in his old room as something apologetic and dim. The room itself was plain in the way of rooms that have been simplified rather than neglected. A bed with a wooden headboard. A dresser with 4 drawers. A chair by the window, one of those ladder-back chairs that is never comfortable but is always present, fulfilling some essential furniture role that cannot be transferred to anything else. A small shelf above the radiator, which he tested with his hand, warm, properly, consistently warm. He unpacked. This took 9 minutes. He knew because he checked the time when he started and when he finished, and the difference was 9 minutes, which was how long it took to remove from a backpack everything he owned and put it into a dresser and onto a shelf. He stood in the middle of the room. His hands had nothing to do, so he went downstairs. He found the kitchen the way people find things in unfamiliar houses by the logic of where things tend to be. 3rd door on the left off the main hall. He went in and found it exactly as it had been an hour ago, warm and orderly, and he began, without deciding to begin, to wipe down the counters. He had found a cloth under the sink, and he was working on the counter to the left of the stove when Desmond appeared in the doorway. Desmond stood there and assessed the situation with the quiet efficiency of someone whose entire professional life had consisted of assessing situations. Then he crossed to the cabinet below the sink, opened it, and produced a different cloth, heavier, the proper kind for kitchen surfaces. He held it out. Callan took it, handed back the one he had. They worked in the same kitchen. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Desmond said, without looking up from the task he had given himself at the far counter, "You don't have to earn your place here." Callan kept moving the cloth in even strokes. "I'm not trying to." "What are you doing then?" He thought about it. He thought about it genuinely, not performing consideration but actually considering the question. "Something to do with my hands," he said. I do better when I'm moving, when I have something in front of me." A pause. Desmond looked at him sideways, a real look, briefly held. "Owen was like that," he said. "He said it the way you say something you hadn't planned to say. And then he didn't take it back, which meant he'd decided not to." Callan didn't ask who Owen was. He knew the name. He had heard it last night. Behind him in the dark, in the specific way, that some names are spoken like they are weighted with more than a person, like they carry everything that person was and is no longer. He waited. Desmond folded the cloth he was using, set it down on the counter. "Her grandson," he said. He was always in motion, always fixing something or building something. He came in the summers from the time he was small, and he would find things that were broken and work on them until they worked. He was quiet for a moment. He fixed most of what's been fixed in this house in the past 8 years. "What happened to him?" Callan asked. Desmond looked at the counter. "Heart attack," he said. "Flat." The flatness of something said so many times it has been smoothed down to its essential form. He was 19 years old. Walking to class on a Tuesday morning in April. His heart had been under too much strain for too long. He paused. He was working 3 jobs, tutoring, kitchen work, weekend deliveries. He had a partial scholarship and he was covering the rest himself, and he would not ask for help. Not from anyone, not even from her. Callan was still. She offered, Desmond said, many times, in every way she could think to offer without making him feel diminished. He said no every time. He had another pause. He had the particular stubbornness of someone who has decided that needing help is a reflection of something fundamental about their own worth, and nothing she said could reach past that. The kitchen held the quiet. "He died thinking he was doing fine," Desmond said. "He died thinking he had it managed. He died at 19 years old on a Tuesday morning because he would not let anyone hold things steady for him long enough to catch his breath." He picked up the cloth again. Not because there was more to clean, because his hands needed something. She never forgave herself for not finding the right words, he said, for not being able to say what she needed to say in a way he could actually receive. He moved to the other end of the counter. "She's been carrying that," he said, "for 4 years. Callan looked at the counter in front of him, at the cloth in his hand. He thought, "I know what that is." He thought, "I know exactly what that is." He kept moving the cloth in even strokes. And they worked together in the warm kitchen without speaking further, and the silence between them was not empty but full in the way of a room that has just held an important word and is taking its time settling around it. She showed him the greenhouse the next morning. He had been up since 5:40 by habit. He had folded the bed covers back with the precision of someone trained by 13 months of staying in places where he was a guest. He had found the kitchen and made himself coffee, noting where the filters were, how much to use, leaving the pot on for Desmond, cleaning up after himself with the thoroughness of someone who understood that this right here was not his kitchen. He was standing at the back window with his coffee when she appeared at 6:50 in her green cardigan and wool socks, moving through the kitchen to the back hall without particular ceremony. "Come," she said as she passed him. Not a command, an offer. He followed. The door to the greenhouse was off the back hall between the coat closet and what looked like a utility room. It looked like a closet door and then opened into an entirely different quality of air, warm and green and alive. The smell of growing things concentrated into a glass room where the discipline of winter did not fully apply. She moved through it with the ease of someone on familiar ground. The orchids along the south bench. The Meyer lemon tree in the corner that had produced 4 lemons the previous spring, and was currently holding 2 of last season's lemons with the stubbornness of something that was not finished yet. The herbs along the west wall, rosemary, thyme, mint, that had expanded beyond its designated pot and was expressing no remorse about it. "Owen built the shelving," she said, running one hand along the edge of the south bench. "Not the greenhouse itself that was here when we moved in 40 years ago. But it needed work, new glass in the roof panels, better drainage along the south edge." She looked up at the ceiling. He spent a whole summer on it. The summer he was 16. She moved to the orchids. Began to examine them with the attention of someone who has learned each one individually. "He used to come in here in the mornings when he visited," she said, "before I was up sometimes. I'd come down and find the door to the greenhouse standing open and him in here, just being still. Which was the only time he was ever still." A pause. "I never asked what he thought about in here." She touched the edge of an orchid spike, testing it. "I've been sorry about that," she said. "For 4 years. Callan stood near the lemon tree. He looked at the 2 remaining lemons hard, green, determined. "Why do you still come out here?" he asked. She considered this honestly. "Because it's his," she said. Still, even now nodded. He understood this completely. He understood it in the specific way of someone who still rode a bicycle because it had belonged to someone. On the 4th day, the Buick was joined by another car. Callan heard it from the greenhouse, where he was repotting the mint, which had finally annexed enough of the rosemary's territory that intervention was no longer optional. He heard gravel displaced at a speed that the gravel was not designed for. He heard a car door with the particular decisiveness of someone who had been deciding things all the way here. He stayed in the greenhouse. He heard voices in the house. Not the words, just the register. A man's voice. Initially at the volume and cadence of someone conducting a normal conversation, and then, gradually, with a different quality. Not louder, more pressurized, the volume staying the same while the pressure underneath it increased. He repotted the mint. When he came back through the house 20 minutes later, Nora was in the sitting room with a man he had not yet met but recognized immediately. 47 years old. Gray suit, good quality, the kind of quality that was visible in the way it held its shape rather than in any visible logo. A phone in his right hand that he was not currently using, but which was held in a way that suggested it might be needed at any moment. He looked at Callan the way people look at something they had been told to expect, and had not fully believed in until they were seeing it. Nora said, "Callan, this is my son, Broderick." Broderick stood, extended his hand, firm, deliberate, the handshake of someone who was making a decision about something while performing courtesy. "Broderick Whitmore," he said. "Callan Webb," Callan said. They shook hands. Broderick's eyes did the calculation Callan expected. The worn shoes. The jeans from a discount chain. The face that was young and was also not young, in the specific way of faces that have been outside in all weather for a long time. "My mother tells me you brought her home Tuesday night," Broderick said. "Yes," Callan said. "On a bicycle, yes." A pause. "That's a long ride," Broderick said. "It is," Callan said. Nora, from her chair, was watching this exchange with the expression of someone observing a chess match they have already solved but are allowing to proceed for educational purposes. Lunch was performed. Performed in the sense that all 3 of them were executing the social contract of a meal, together with a degree of attention that would not have been required if everyone at the table were entirely comfortable. Desmond served. A simple soup, bread, something with the herbs from the greenhouse. He moved around the table with the practiced invisibility of someone who understood that his job was to support the scene, not to be in it. Broderick asked about the greenhouse. He asked about Nora's schedule. He asked how she had been sleeping. He asked these questions with genuine concern, flattened under a layer of something that needed to be addressed before the concern could come fully through. After lunch, Nora went upstairs to rest. Desmond cleared the table, and Broderick looked at Callan and said, "Walk with me." They went to the back porch. The garden in the second week of November, all structure. Dried stems and seed heads and the particular beauty of things that have given everything they had and are now just the frame of themselves. The greenhouse behind it, warm and green incongruous. Broderick put his hands in his pockets. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My mother is a wealthy woman," said like the first line of an argument he had prepared. "I know," Callan said. Broderick looked at him. This was not the expected response. "She has a condition," Broderick said, "that affects her judgment in some circumstances." "At night," Callan said, "when she's alone and cold and in an unfamiliar place. During the day, she's completely competent. She told me that herself, and she was correct to do so to your own doctor." Another pause, longer. "You've done some homework," Broderick said. "She told me about her condition. She was thorough about it." Callan looked at the garden. "She's thorough about most things." Broderick was quiet. The garden held its stillness. "A person in her position," Broderick said carefully, "living alone. A certain amount of vulnerability." "Yes," Callan said. "She has a condition that creates specific vulnerabilities at night. Desmond manages that carefully. She has a doctor who monitors her. And she has a mind that works extremely well during the day." He looked at Broderick. "That's the whole picture." "I'm not accusing you of anything," Broderick said. "I know," Callan said. "You're concerned about your mother. That's the right instinct. You're just not sure yet whether I'm part of the solution or part of the problem." Broderick looked at him steadily. "Correct," he said. "That's fair." Callan said, "You don't know me. You should check." Broderick blinked, the specific blink of recalibration. "I'm going to call her doctor," he said. "Have her assessed, you should." Callan said seriously, "Do it." "You're not going to. Why would I argue? If she's fine, you'll know she's fine. If there's something the doctor is missing, then finding out is more important than me being right." He looked at Broderick. "Either way, you should call." Broderick stood very still, then he nodded. Once, the single, deliberate nod of someone making a decision. He went inside. Callan stayed on the porch. He looked at the greenhouse. The warm light of it in the grey November afternoon, the green visible through the glass. He thought about what he had said, about checking, about finding out. He had not said any of it to be smart. He had said it because it was true, and because the alternative, arguing, defending, making Broderick's concern into an adversarial thing, would have served no one, and would have taken energy that nobody here had to spare. Move, but move towards something, not away from. He went inside. Dr. Yvonne Castillo came on Thursday afternoon. She arrived in a practical car, parked without drama, came to the door in a dark coat carrying a leather bag that was old enough to be an heirloom but worn in a way that said it was an heirloom she actually used. 52. Brown eyes. The kind of efficiency in her movements that came not from hurrying but from having eliminated everything unnecessary long ago. She shook Broderick's hand. She shook Callan's hand. Exactly the same, firm, brief present. Then she went upstairs to see Nora. She was up there for 50 minutes. Broderick sat in the front room and held his phone without looking at it. Callan sat in the kitchen and looked at his coffee going cool and did not pretend to be doing anything else. Desmond moved through the house on whatever his rounds were. The completion of them was always evident. Their execution was always invisible. When Dr. Castillo came downstairs, she sat across from Broderick in the front room, set her bag beside her chair, and said what she had to say. Nora's cognitive function showed no meaningful deterioration. Her daytime performance remained well within normal parameters. The episodic disorientation was documented, understood, and being appropriately monitored. There was no clinical basis for a finding of diminished decision-making capacity. Broderick received this, quietly, without visible reaction. Then, "Thank you." Dr. Castillo stood, gathered her bag. Then she stopped, looked through to the kitchen, at Callan. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" They stood in the back hall, near the greenhouse door. Through the glass of it, the orchids were visible. Nora's particular arrangements. The hours of attention made material. "She told me about the night at the bus stop," Dr. Castillo said, in some detail. Callan waited. "She talked about you for almost 20 minutes, she said. Not as a compliment, as a clinical observation. That's the most she's spoken about any new thing in approximately a year." He looked at the greenhouse. "Do you know what she does?" Dr. Castillo said. "What she has been doing in this community for the past 20 years. Not specifically, he said. She told him. Directly, without embellishment, in the way of someone who has learned that the most important things should be said plainly. 20 years. A trust running under a name that was not Nora's name. Scholarships, quietly funded, routed through the school district's financial aid channels so that the recipients went through the normal application process and received letters from the district and never knew the source. Not 12 students, not 20. 43 students over 20 years. From Millhaven and 2 neighboring towns. Most of them were the first in their families to attend secondary school past 16. Anonymous, every dollar of it. And not only that. 3 family services programs funded through the Trust's secondary arm. The reading room expansion at the Millhaven Public Library. A women's shelter in the county seat that had quietly received enough in annual contributions to expand its overnight capacity by 8 beds. All of it under names that were not hers. Because, as Dr. Castillo said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone relaying a known fact, Nora believed that real generosity was the kind no one thanked you for, 'cause they didn't know to. Callan stood in the back hall and looked at the orchids through the greenhouse glass, and felt the specific weight of understanding something about a person that makes everything that came before it make more sense. "I'm telling you this," Dr. Castillo said, "because I want you to understand what you walked into. This is not a lonely old woman who has formed an attachment to the first person who was kind to her." She met his eyes. "This is a woman who has been doing extraordinary work, alone for 2 decades, who is sharper and more considered than most people will ever understand, and who has been for a long time very lonely in the specific way of people who give a great deal and receive very little in return." A pause, because they don't let anyone close enough to give it back. Callan looked at the greenhouse door. "She said you reminded her of Owen," Dr. Castillo said. She picked up her bag. "I wanted to meet the person she said that about," she said. "Now I have." She walked back through the house to the front door, left without ceremony. That evening, Callan found Nora in the greenhouse. After the day, after Dr. Castillo, after Broderick's careful managed distance politeness at dinner, after the specific weight of the things he now knew he needed the greenhouse. Not for any particular reason. He just followed the pull of the warm green room, the way you follow the pull of anywhere that has started to mean something. She was at the orchid bench, turned when she heard him, looked at his face. "Read something in it." "Sit down," she said. "I want to tell you about Owen." He sat on the stool by the lemon tree and she told him. Not the version Desmond had told. Not the version Dr. Castillo had implied. The full version. The version that cost her something to say. The version she had not said completely to anyone. Because saying it completely required being with someone who would receive it completely, and she had not had that person until now. Owen. Who had called her every Sunday at 7 p.m. without fail for 3 years. Who had fixed things that were broken not because he was asked but because he noticed. Who had the gray eyes that skipped a generation and came from Walter. Who had laughed with his whole face the same way his grandfather had. Who had died on a Tuesday morning in April 4 years ago, on the campus of a university 2 hours north, walking to his 8 o'clock class. Because his heart had been carrying too much for too long and had run out of reserves without anyone. Without her knowing how close to the edge he was. She had offered, he had said no. She had offered differently, he had said no differently. She had tried every approach she could construct. He had found a way past each one. "I'm fine, Grandma," said every Sunday at 7 p.m. And she had believed it because she needed to believe it and because his voice when he said it was so complete and so certain. And she had not pushed past the certainty because pushing past someone's certainty, when they are 19 and proud and doing their best, feels like a violation of something. Except, "I should have pushed past it," she said. Not the certainty, the fear underneath it. Because that's what it was. He was afraid that needing help meant something about him, about his ability, about his worth. She was quiet. And I never found the way to tell him that it doesn't. That needing help is not a referendum on your value. That letting someone hold things steady for a moment while you find your footing is not weakness. It is the only way any of us actually survive. Her voice was steady, not the steadiness of suppression, the steadiness of something that has been fully felt and fully absorbed and has settled. I never got to tell him that. I ran out of time. The greenhouse was quiet around them. The click of something in the irrigation system. The faint hum of the grow light on the back bench. The Meyer lemon tree, holding its 2 remaining lemons with great determination. "You remind me of him," she said. "Not because you are him, you're not, you're entirely yourself, but because you carry the same thing. That same, she looked for the word, grip, on yourself, like if you loosened it for one moment something would collapse. Callan looked at his hands on his knees. He did not say, "You're right," he did not say, "I know." But he said nothing, which was the same as saying everything. "I didn't get to say it to him," she said. "I would very much like to say it to you." She looked at him steadily. "It's all right to need things. It's all right to accept what's offered. Letting someone help you is not losing. It's not defeat. It is actually one of the braver things a person can do, because it requires you to trust that you're worth helping." Callan looked at the lemon tree. At the 2 lemons, hanging on past the season, holding. "He sounds like someone who mattered," he said. "He was someone who mattered," she said.
"So are you."
The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. After a while, she went back to her orchids. After a while, he went to find Desmond, who told him where the extra pots were kept, because the mint situation had become urgent, and the greenhouse held them both, and the warmth of it, and the smell of living things, and the particular quality of an evening that has been difficult and honest, and has left something cleaner in its wake. Outside on the gravel path, the gate held its permanent open angle, patient, waiting for the right moment, which had not yet arrived, but which was coming. December arrived without apology. One morning the yard at 22 Aldercroft was brown and bare and ordinary. The next morning there was frost on the greenhouse glass, and the Meyer lemon tree had dropped one of its 2 remaining lemons onto the soil below, as if the cold had finally talked it out of holding on. Callan found it when he came in to water the herbs. He picked it up, set it on the shelf, looked at it for a moment, then watered the herbs anyway, because that was the thing about plants. They didn't care what else was happening. They just needed what they needed: water, light, someone to notice. He had been at 22 Aldercroft for 3 weeks. 3 weeks was long enough that the house had stopped feeling like a place he was visiting and started feeling like a place he was in. Different things. The distinction mattered. He knew which drawer held the good knife. He knew the 3rd stair from the top creaked at the left edge and was silent at the right. He knew Nora was always in the greenhouse by 7, and that the best time to talk to her about anything real was in that first hour, when the light came in sideways, and her hands were in something, and her guard, which was not exactly a guard. More like the professional composure of someone who had spent decades being capable, came down just slightly. He knew these things the way you know things when you're paying attention. Callan had always paid attention. It was the one reliable skill that being poor had given him. You notice what you can't afford to miss. Broderick came back on a Sunday, 2nd Sunday of December. He called ahead this time. He parked carefully. He came through the front door with the particular quality of someone who had been thinking on the drive over, and arrived with less certainty than when they started. He found Callan in the kitchen. Looked at the counter where Callan had been cutting bread. "Is she up?" "Greenhouse," Callan said. "Since 7. Broderick set his keys on the hall table, didn't move toward the back immediately, just stood there. The stillness of a man who has something to say and has not yet found the first word. Callan cut another slice. Waited. "I didn't call the paper," Broderick said. The Millhaven Gazette had run a 3-paragraph story the previous week. Neutral headline, accurate facts, no malice. Just the bare shape of the situation, which was enough bare shapes, presented without context, have a way of implying everything the reader already suspected. Nora's phone had rung for 2 days afterward. "I know," Callan said. "How?" "Because you were more surprised by it than I was." Broderick absorbed this. "Someone in the neighborhood," he said. "Probably." "People talk, always talk," Callan said. "Doesn't mean the facts are wrong. Just means the context is missing." Broderick looked at him. "How old are you?" he said. 18. "A beat." "Right," Broderick said, the word carrying something complicated inside it. He went to find his mother. Callan did not follow them. He understood something about Broderick that he had understood from the first afternoon on the back porch. Broderick was not a bad person. He was a person who had been so completely inside his own life for so long that he had lost the habit of looking out of it. The calls on the right days, the visits when he could, the worry conducted from Columbus at a distance that felt manageable, and was actually in every way that counted not. He had not done this deliberately. He had done it the way people do things that cost them less than they should, gradually, incrementally, each small withdrawal feeling reasonable in the moment, and adding up to something larger than he had intended. Callan had watched this from the outside his whole life. People with full houses who were somehow still alone. He had once envied them. Then he got close enough to see that full was not the same as present. He stayed in the kitchen, made tea, waited. They were in the greenhouse for a long time. When Broderick came back through the house, his coat was in his hand instead of on his back, which was small. But Callan noticed he'd taken it off in the greenhouse, which meant he'd settled, which meant something in there had allowed him to stop preparing to leave. Broderick stopped in the kitchen doorway. "She wants to have lunch," he said. "The three of us." "Okay," Callan said. Broderick looked at the cabinet under the stairs, visible through the hall. The latch that Callan had fixed the previous week with a pin from Desmond's supply drawer. "That latch has been broken for 2 years," he said. "It's fixed now," Callan said. Something crossed Broderick's face. Not gratitude exactly, recognition. The specific feeling of realizing that something has been quietly taken care of in the time you were somewhere else. He nodded once. Went to hang his coat. Lunch was different, not dramatically. But the difference was real, and all three of them felt it. Nora talked about the greenhouse, about a recipe she wanted to try with the rosemary. About the reading room at the Millhaven Library getting new shelves in January, said the way she always said things connected to her quiet work, as plain fact, without marking their significance. Broderick listened, actually listened, not performing attention while his mind was somewhere else. Receiving what she said, the way you receive someone when you have decided, recently and specifically, to be present for them. Near the end of the meal, Nora mentioned Owen, a small thing. A memory of him at this kitchen table as a boy, working on a school project, covered in glue and completely unapologetic. She said it lightly. The way you can finally say light things about someone you've lost when enough time has passed that the memory can be entered without it taking you under. Broderick smiled. Small, involuntary. The kind of smile a memory forces past your defenses before the grief behind it can stop it. For just that moment he looked like someone's son, not a lawyer, not a concerned adult managing a situation. A son at his mother's table, remembering. Callan looked down at his soup, gave them that. After lunch, Broderick found him on the back porch. The garden, December, the structure of things. Broderick stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at the greenhouse. "She told me what she told you," he said. "About Owen, the full version." A pause. "She's never told anyone that." "Not completely." Callan said nothing. "She trusts you," Broderick said, sitting with the fact of it. "She trusted me before she knew me," Callan said. "That first night. I think she needed to trust someone. I just happened to stop." Broderick looked at the garden. "I haven't been here enough," he said. Flat, no inflection. The sound of a sentence someone has been not saying for long enough that saying it finally is its own kind of relief. "I know," Callan said. "You're very direct." "You said something true," Callan said. "I agreed with it. That's not directness. That's just the conversation." Broderick almost laughed. Not quite. But the shape of it was there. "I'm going to come back more," he said. Not because of he gestured at the situation, the house, the whole complicated fact of the past weeks. Because I should have been. Before all of this. "Okay," Callan said. A pause. "You don't have to act like that's nothing," Broderick said. "I'm not," Callan said. "It's something. I just don't think it needs me to make anything of it." Broderick stood there for another moment then. "She was right about you." "What did she say?" "That you listen more than you talk." He turned toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. Owen did that too. He went inside. Callan stood in the cold, looked at the greenhouse, the last lemon on the Maya tree, visible through the glass, still holding. Something had shifted. He didn't have a clean word for it yet, but he could feel it. The specific feeling of a thing that has been moving in one direction for a long time beginning slowly to move in another. He went inside. The envelope appeared on a Wednesday morning, on the shelf in his room. He hadn't heard her come up, which meant she'd done it early, before he was up, and been deliberate about not being there when he found it. He opened it. Not money, not paperwork. A photograph, printed on plain copy paper, black and white, grainy at the edges. Harmon's gas station, Route 9. The timestamp, 8:47 p.m., November 12. 2 people at the small table by the window. A boy without a jacket. An older woman with a paper cup in both hands. She was laughing. He was looking out the window at the dark. Neither of them knew the camera was there. That was the thing about it. Complete unself-consciousness of both of them. Not a moment being performed. Just a moment, happening. He turned it over, her handwriting, small and precise. "You stopped when no one else did. That is not a small thing. That is everything." Callan sat down on the edge of the bed. He looked at the photograph for a long time. He thought about being on the other side of a camera, about moments caught without permission, about his mother, her photograph, the one from the plastic bag, her laughing without knowing anyone was watching. He got up. put the photograph on the shelf above the radiator, next to his mother, Iris Webb and Nora Whitmore, side by side. On a shelf above a radiator that worked properly, he sat back down on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since the hospital, since the paperwork, since the clearing of the apartment and the first night at Glen Marshes, and the 13 months of keeping himself moving, because stillness had teeth, he cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Like something that had been held in a very small space for a very long time, finally, carefully, being given room. He let it happen. He let it go on for as long as it went on. Then he dried his face, stood up, went downstairs. The Emberlight Fund was Nora's idea, but it was also, in a way, Callan's. It grew out of a January morning conversation in the kitchen, the kind that starts about one thing and becomes something else. He was telling her about a boy he'd known in school, Marcus, who had aged out of foster care at 18 with a garbage bag of belongings and genuine ability in mathematics that 3 teachers had noted and that the machinery of survival had quietly consumed. He just needed someone to hold things steady, Callan said, long enough to get a footing. Nora listened with her hands around her cup. That's all it usually takes, she said. Nobody did. No, she said. Nobody did. She looked out the window at the greenhouse, frost still on the glass in the early morning. I've been thinking, she said, about what the trust does and what it doesn't do. It funds education, which matters, but it doesn't address the before, the part where someone is just trying not to fall. For kids with nothing, Callan said. And for people living alone, he said, who get missed. She looked at him. Yes, she said. Neither of them said the word fund yet. It was just a conversation. 2 people at a kitchen table at 6:30 in the morning, talking about the shape of what was missing. But conversations like that, between people like those 2, in kitchens like that one, have a way of becoming things. The name came from Callan, said casually, in the middle of talking about something else, Emberlight. She stopped, asked him to say it again, wrote it down on the back of an envelope, the light from something still burning. After everything else has gone dark, and that was that. He went back to school in February. A scholarship from the Whitfield Community Trust, applied for through the school's normal financial aid office. His name in the pool like everyone else's. No back channel. He did not ask. She did not say. What he knew was that a letter arrived from Millhaven Community College in late January. Full scholarship. Spring enrollment. He brought it to the greenhouse. She read it, handed it back. That's good news, she said. I didn't do anything, she said. Mild. Absolute, you applied. The committee decided. He looked at her. She looked back, gray eyes, clear and slightly imperfect. Okay, he said. Good, she said, and went back to her orchids. He kept the bicycle. Day classes, evening shifts at the Emberlight office, a rented room on 3rd Street with 3 folding tables and a donated printer and a calendar on the wall. He rode the blue-green bicycle to both, not because he had no other option, because it was hers and he was his mother's son. And that mattered enough to keep being reminded of. April came in sideways, the way Ohio springs do. One day frost. The next day light, real light, the kind that doesn't apologize, that makes the bare garden suddenly look intentional rather than depleted. The greenhouse came alive. Orchids sent up new spikes. The Meyer lemon tree, which had held its last lemon through December and January and February, with the stubbornness of something that has decided it is not finished, put out 3 new blossoms in the first week of April that filled the glass room with a smell so clean it stopped you at the door. And the gate, still open, still at its permanent angle. He had looked at it every day for 5 months, had thought about fixing it many times, had decided each time that it was not his to finish. But on a Saturday morning in April, Nora came to the greenhouse doorway and said, without preamble, the gate. He looked at her. I think it's time, she said. He found what he needed in the shed, 40 minutes. The hinge was corroded but salvageable. Desmond produced a replacement pin from somewhere. Because Desmond always produced what was needed. When it was done, Callan swung the gate. It moved cleanly, closed fully. The latch caught with a sound that was small and definite and right. He stood there. Nora was at the front door watching. He would have been pleased, she said. He would have done it better, Callan said. Probably, she said. But you did it. He looked at the gate, closed and solid. He started it, Callan said. Yes, she said. Some things take more than one person. He was riding home from the Emberlight office one Thursday afternoon when he came down Sycamore, past the hardware store, past Gus Perino's grocery, warm and yellow in the window, past the corner of Sycamore and 4th. Bus stop 9. His hands did the brakes before he decided to stop. Both of them. Same reflex, same quiet instinct as 5 months ago, as if the body remembers the right thing even when the mind hasn't caught up yet. He got off the bicycle. Someone was on the bench. A kid, 16 maybe, hoodie pushed up around his ears, a backpack between his feet, eyes on the street, not watching for a bus, watching nothing. The specific middle distance of someone who has been sitting in a feeling long enough that it has become the scenery. Callan leaned the bicycle against the shelter, sat down, left enough space, not too much. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The afternoon moved around them. A car. Someone's music from an open window, loud then fading. The particular quality of late afternoon light in spring that makes everything look slightly like a memory while it's still happening. "Hey," Callan said. The kid glanced over, wary. The wariness of someone who has learned that unexpected attention usually costs something. "You waiting for something?" Callan said. A pause. "I don't know," the kid said. Callan nodded, looked out at the street. "Yeah," he said. "I know that feeling." He didn't say anything else, didn't move to leave, just sat there. The way someone had once stood in a kitchen with a torn receipt and a phone number and decided the boy who had stopped was worth stopping for. The way a bicycle had been ridden 2 hours uphill in the dark because walking away from someone lost was not something certain hands were able to do. The way a room had been offered without conditions, a photograph placed without ceremony. A gate finally, quietly, closed, small things, which were not small things, which were, it turned out, everything. The kid didn't leave. Callan didn't leave. The light moved across the sidewalk at the corner of Sycamore and 4th. And 2 people sat on a bench in the earliest spring afternoon and were for that moment simply not alone. Which was the beginning. Which is always only the beginning.